Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Boston BioLife Innovation Series. My name is Joseph Krieger, and today we have the pleasure of meeting with Melissa King. Melissa is the Chief Operating Officer of the Healthspan Action Coalition, and she's the previous director of the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, and she's had multiple programs and plans in place to fund the research in California for very important initiatives within her role as the California Research Institute for Regenerative Medicine. So Melissa, thank you very much for being with Boston BioLife. And we had an exciting time at the World Stem Cell Summit, and you and I played an integral role of helping Bernie put together what I thought was one of the most amazing meetings in medicine, because it really brought together the highlights of the research side of things with technology and innovation, and the patient advocacy side was really second to none.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for that. And I agree. What an exciting time to continue to be part of what I would say for myself is the regenerative medicine space, having focused for 20 years now in California, working on a couple of statewide ballot initiative campaigns to first form the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, where I then worked for 6.5 years, as you said, as an executive director. And then to come back and work on another campaign in which we were successful with in 2020 to get another $5.5 billion for that research here in California, focused on regenerative medicine, stem cell research from the beginning, helping grow that field for sure in the first several years of the existence of the agency, and really from a global perspective with global partnerships, among other things. But then to see it having progressed to where it has, so that by 2018-19, when we started talking about 2020, there were, hundreds of clinical trials happening around the world, 100 even here just in California, either funded by this agency, which remains unique, or for which the earlier stage research leading to that clinical trial had been funded. And to follow that work, getting another $5.5 billion in 2020 with an opportunity to then work with Bernie Siegel, who was a leader in the stem cell field when it was really, really early days. And before we got Prop 71 passed in California in 2004, creating our state stem cell agency. And, he put together the World Stem Cell Summit, and it became really the leading conference in stem cell research and regenerative medicine, like you said, Joe, that combines the science with business, and perhaps most importantly, with patients and patient advocacy, actually being part of the conversation from the beginning, which is something that Faster Cures, Michael Milken's organization, and many others have been working on for years, to the point where now for the past several years, we've heard about, and many of us know, patients who have been involved in conversations at the FDA, which is excellent. Where we are now with this is this opportunity to carry on the work that Bernie and I and you have been doing together for many years through the World Stem Cell Summit, through building CIRM in California, to keep that research funded at a level that really supports driving to clinical trials, so we get as many shots on goal to find better treatments and hopefully cures eventually for some of these chronic illnesses and diseases that have been plaguing us for generations, many of which are associated with aging, which brings us to how and why you and I are working together again, yay, and with Bernie, focused on health span and longevity, which for Bernie and me, as we've been talking about, is really a continuation of the work that we've done for the past 20 years, more than 20 in Bernie's case, being the de facto lawyer for the stem cell research arena and the International Society for Stem Cell Research, which now has thousands of people at its annual conference. Bernie was their lawyer as they were just forming that organization, and they recruited him for that because of some of his other work in the legal space. But he also was at the same time becoming a patient advocate because he went through cancer diagnosis and treatment. But so where we are now is we have this opportunity to continue working with the patient communities and the patients and patient advocates we know so well, plus the scientists and the business around this science, which is so necessary. We always need industry with us to get things finally to market, to patients, directly into their hands outside of a clinical trial and into wide use. So we've got to have all three of those involved. And Bernie and I are doing that through, as you mentioned, the Healthspan Action Coalition, which he and I and another colleague, Sabrina Cohen, formed last September in 2022. And Bernie then went and launched it at a longevity summit led by Aubrey de Grey in Dublin last October. And it's an amazing opportunity to continue the work that we've done focused on regenerative medicine, but shifting somewhat to say now the next frontier. Now that stem cell research and regenerative medicine have moved along, it's a well-developed field. There's plenty of funding. Well, maybe there's never plenty of funding, but there's a good amount of funding going into it. They're able to combine stem cell programs with gene therapies in many cases, and these are leading to, knock on wood, what we will hopefully soon be able to call cures for certain diseases, and we're getting closer and closer for others, just taking a look at the clinical trials. But we can continue that now by talking about not just longevity. Let's not just extend people's lifespan and have us living longer, but let's have a better health span. Let's live more years, excellent, but let's live those years disease-free if we can, and living our best life for as long as possible. And one of the ways to address that, as you and I have talked about, Joe, is through lifestyle options that we all have to address our own aging, and a responsibility that those of us familiar with all of this have to society at large to better inform people about what they can do. And this is around nutrition. This is decades old information and research, and it can get a little confusing, like should I be vegan or should I be paleo or keto? But the most important thing, I think, is for the lifestyle side of it, people need to be paying attention to diet. Probably exercise and moving is the most important thing. You must do this as often as possible. Then diet. And then, yes, there are a whole bunch of supplements that you can take. Much of the thinking about the supplements is science-based. But of course, then you can never stop doing the research into the biological causes of aging and ways to address it biologically. So we can exercise and we can eat well and we can take supplements that they're not necessarily through the FDA process, but science has gone into them, and there are many, many people to read about what stack they take, and and there's a healthy debate about whether or not to consider aging itself a disease, leading into conversations that are also very important about ageism and mental health for seniors or people that are aging based on, well, we're all aging based on the way they're being treated. But at the same time, you can't have that debate keep aging from perhaps being considered a target for which there can be research funded, because that is a way to address aging in a way that may be funding research targeted at specific diseases, as we have done up until now, and which I have been, as you've heard, a huge advocate of and part of getting billions of dollars for in California. Now what we need to do, instead of only doing disease by disease research, is actually look at the mechanisms of aging and fund research into that. Listen to and follow the work of and provide funding for the work of people like Aubrey de Grey, Matt Kaberlin, David Sinclair, that are looking into these. They may also have their beliefs in scientifically based reasons for taking certain supplements. That's great. But also we need the research so we can develop a deeper knowledge base about the biological causes of aging and these diseases that we've been trying to develop cures and treatments for decades already, just with stem cells, and before that and with other areas of medical research, we have to fund it at an adequate level. And that's part of the reason for the Healthspan Action Coalition, is to take what Bernie and I have been doing for so long, which is developing the support of groups, a coalition of patients and patient advocates coming at this from various disease areas and experiences, and saying, yes, together we agree that aging is the target, and let's fund that, and let's talk about that, and educate our elected and appointed officials about it so that funding mechanisms can be put in place, and also educate people globally so that they can support this while also more and more taking responsibility for the lifestyle pieces that are based on, as we know, decades old research. We all know that we need to eat a healthy diet, and probably removing sugar and white flour is a really great start, eating lots of fruits and vegetables, but that's decades old research. What we want to get into now, what are the biological cellular level things that we can do to address aging and age-related diseases?
Well, I think you did a wonderful job at tying it all together. And the observations that I've made over the 7 years or 8 years now that Boston BioLife's been watching Bernie Siegel and the World Stem Cell Summit and having awareness of organizations of CERM, et cetera, is now we're actually seeing the science. I mean, at first it seemed initially was, does this stuff work and are there applications for it? But now there's people in organizations like yours, and they're actually helping people get access to the technology. And yeah, there's simple things like nutrition, exercise, and red light therapy. And there's a lot of fun stuff. And the meeting that we're running on longevity is really about that personalized precision health stuff that people can do. But it's backed by the science behind a lot of things like photobiomodulation, like biomarkers, what tests are the most useful, how does red light therapy activate mitochondria, really cool things that everybody can get around. Patients can get involved, and they should, and they need to be involved. I think COVID shifted how patients perceive medicine. And like you said, our most precious asset is our life, and the quality of our life is the most important aspect to that. So the time is now. And groups like yours really play such a powerful role. And I'm looking forward to the meeting in Dublin and the different groups that are coming together, albeit from a different standpoint, but all with a similar mission. And when you can leverage the assets of a Wake Forest or a California Research or a University of Miami, and you can look at big organizations that have major impact on massive patient populations like diabetes or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, and realize that every patient is somewhere in a spectrum of those diseases. And we all have an opportunity and a role to play in how well we respond epigenetically to help deal with this. But it's about providing the tools and the resources. And congratulations on your career, but the things you're able to do, and really now having impact that can really help people.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I'm excited about this program that you're putting together, and looking forward to listening to it in its entirety myself. There's always something to learn by people who are exploring various ways that we can, as individuals, address our own health and lifespan and health span. Really, it's much of what you're talking about, like the red light therapy. That's another area that needs to be looked at. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to this program. Thank you.
So we have things like energy medicine, right? And then we have chemicals. So we're doing a program for an ancient Chinese medicine physician who wants to integrate aesthetics and integrative medicine, and looking at some of the roles of the ancient medicine. And his model is anatomy, chemistry, energy, and spirituality, because all of those have a role to play. And the patients, they resonate. People are meditating more. They're learning about mind, body. There's wellness programs and mindfulness programs in schools and in corporations and colleges. So I think that part of it has been evolving as well. But really having the opportunity to put the science down where people can believe it, there's studies to prove it. So what I say is, does it work and can we prove it? Regulatory is a different animal. It's hard for the regulators to stay in touch with the merging, blending of science. Like just in this conversation, we've talked about, translational medicine, regenerative medicine, functional medicine, anti-aging medicine, biohacking. It's all one and the same in that it's the individual biochemistry of the patient, how they present, how they react to the things that they're faced with in their physical world, the epigenetics, but also how they combat those things through their immune system and supplements and tools that are available to them. But the research side, like you said, and the advocacy side, and I know that's a huge part of the work you and Bernie are doing with the Healthspan Action Coalition. It's why I wanted to be involved, because I felt like this was one of the best groups so that could actually implement, and Bernie's collected quite a few of these groups. So tell us a little bit about, the day-to-day mission of HCA and some of the things you guys are getting done.
Yeah, absolutely. So our first order of business really was to show that there is a coalition already there. And one of the ways that we went about doing that is just for Bernie and me going to many of the patient advocates and patient advocacy organizations that we were already very familiar with through our work over the past 20 years. And it turned out that we were right. There's great interest and great demand for focusing on aging, lifespan, health span, and longevity among patient groups. So I'll give you an example, an experience that Bernie had. One of the first conversations that he had was with Sabrina Cohen from Miami, and she has the Sabrina Cohen Foundation and has done so much for people globally, I would say. But as an advocate, she is a person living with a spinal cord injury. She's done a lot for people in Miami, getting resources for people in a similar situation to hers for use of beaches and equipment and a focus on their needs, which is really, really wonderful to see. So she's advocating at that level directly for people and impacting hundreds of people's lives every day. But she's also an advocate on a broader scale as a patient living with a chronic injury in her case, but one that, as she made really clear to Bernie in an initial conversation with him when we were thinking, he and I, about starting the Healthspan Action Coalition, about the fact that, yes, absolutely, people living with spinal cord injuries have to think about health span and longevity and lifespan, along with everything else that they have to think about, along with getting used to a new way of living after having been people that could walk around like most of us can, adjusting to that and the challenges that come up with that. They also know, especially those that really think about it from a patient advocacy point of view, like Sabrina does, that their lifespan is being limited by their injury. So it isn't just that their daily lives are more difficult, but biologically, their body dealing with this injury affects their lifespan. It certainly has already affected their health span. And so they're very interested in being part of a coalition that is focused on the target of aging, just like, I will say, Bernie and I both found in our separate worlds and then working together. Bernie was on the board of Prop 14 that we got passed in California in 2020 to get the additional $5.5 billion for stem cells here in California, stem cells and gene therapy, regenerative medicine projects. When you have a platform that is applicable to people suffering with or interested in various diseases, you can bring them all together into a coalition and just have a much stronger voice as a coalition than you would just as a few individuals. And that's what we've done with the Healthspan Action Coalition, is bring together patient advocates and advocacy organizations that are focused on various diseases like Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, cystic fibrosis, diabetes, and then several rare diseases that are always very important in the patient advocacy world, like Batten disease for children that are born and really aren't expected to live very long. Spinal muscular atrophy, another one. We've brought together advocates and organizations from these various disease perspectives, all in support of the concept of health span. And as is always the case with advocacy, this is work that may not be helpful to the individual or to their family member advocating right now. But the point is to advocate for what we believe is the research that is needed to help us get closer and closer and eventually to the goal of developing better treatments. And again, I always say with hesitation, but hopefully cures, but we have to wait until it's all the way through the FDA process. We have to have safety and efficacy. We can't depend on stem cell clinics that are claiming to be able to cure diseases when we know that there's no such thing through the FDA yet, for example, but we advocate on behalf of this research and science so that future generations will benefit from it. And hopefully, in the case of longevity and health span research, the hope from people like Aubrey de Grey and others is that it will happen soon enough if we conduct it at adequate levels, which means if we fund it at adequate levels, we'll get to the point where we reach longevity escape velocity. We will get to the point where the science is ready for us, and those of us still around can benefit from some of these biological cellular ways of addressing aging. And that's why we're building this coalition. And it really is global. And it's very important to us as people that have been patient advocates and have interacted with patient advocates, along with scientists and people in industry for decades at this point, but particularly the advocates. This must be global, and it must be for everyone. That's why I was interested in building and getting additional funding for CIRM, because that goes to research that, while it is happening at universities and research institutes, will ultimately, hopefully, land in industry, and then also hopefully ultimately land in the hands of patients regardless of their socioeconomic situation. And that's how Bernie and I and Sabrina feel about HealthSpan, that we want to support this. And we're early days in this being considered a field and a research target, and whether that can be teased out of funding just for the diseases. But we really believe it must be global and that there must be distributive justice. Just because the research is being done in the United States or in Japan or in the UK shouldn't mean that someone in Latin America or Africa will never have access to it. And not to say that there isn't research being done in those places either, but there are huge populations there with socioeconomic challenges, shall we say, and we would not want to leave those populations out of reaping the same benefits from this research and its outcomes as the rest of us. Longevity often is put into the box of being a rich person's, or maybe more specifically, a rich white man's game, and funded largely by people in Silicon Valley interested themselves in living forever. And a couple of things that I will say about that is, sure, yes, those people have been interested in it for quite a while now, but also much of their interest leads to them funding research that really goes way beyond just themselves. And then the other thing I would say is, when someone is willing to be an N of one and experiment with themselves, that's actually a benefit to all of us. Even though it can't be applied to everybody, it certainly is interesting data to have. I have much appreciation for people that are willing to do that. And I also have a lot of appreciation for people who, while their motivation may be, I want to live forever and I've hacked science in other ways, computer science, to make, I think, the world a better place with the technology that I brought about or the company that I built. And because I'm interested in living forever, I will fund this research. But guess what? Once that research is done, it can benefit many of us, and the same people that we're talking about when we have that discussion about the interest from that one particular quarter in longevity. Often they are funding, some projects that may sound like they're more in that realm of, oh, this is focused on them and their desire to live forever, but they're also funding more traditional research in universities and research institutes that is similar to what I've been working on developing funding for the past 20 years. And so I think it takes a village, and part of that village is people that are the biohackers or the very, very high net worth individuals that are interested in longevity. We all should be, each of us should be. But what we need to do as the Healthspan Action Coalition is make sure that many, many, many more people in the world are having these conversations and also want to live longer and healthier. So removing the I want to live forever from the conversation and just saying we want to live certainly longer. That's always been a goal. We always have, as a society, have talked about lifespan, and we certainly don't want it to get shorter, like we saw happen during COVID pandemic. We all want to see it get longer as a general statement, even if at an individual level, especially when you delve into the personal and the spiritual without being religious. But not everybody wants to live forever, and that's fine too. But while we are living, let's live healthily and be able to jump up out of a chair or go skiing or climb a mountain or swim across a channel, whatever it is that we want to do physically, whatever it is that we want to continue doing mentally. Let's not limit ourselves. And certainly let's not allow problems that we can solve at the biological cellular level keep us from living those ways that I've just described.
Well, that's amazing. And I think people should pay attention to the Healthspan Action Coalition. How do people get in touch with you and know what you're doing?
Sure. Yep. So they can come to our website, which is healthspanaction.org. Lots of information on our website. They can sign up to receive our newsletter. They can follow us on social media. We have a strong presence on LinkedIn, for example, which is probably right now the most useful for us because of trying to tie together this network of patients and patient advocates with scientists and with people in industry. You'll see us in other social media areas in the future, but right now I would say our website, healthspanaction.org, or find us on LinkedIn. I'm also happy to have anybody who would like to get directly in touch with me. My email address is melissa@healthspanaction.org, and it's MELISSA, 1L, 2 S's, at healthspanaction.org. If you're listening to this and you have an interest in what we're doing, or you have questions, or you're looking to connect with somebody from maybe the scientific realm, I do a lot of that for patient advocates and new patients that get in touch with me based on my history with building CIRM and working on the 2 ballot initiatives and also running Americans for Cures for several years. And I am always happy to try and connect you with someone. I am not a doctor or a scientist myself. I'm more a policy and communications and operational executive in these areas, but always happy to connect people with who I think would be the right person for them to talk to, or at the very least, point them in the right direction informationally for the questions that they have.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa, and we'll continue to promote the Healthspan Action Coalition as we promote some of the summertime longevity programs that we are paying attention to, including our own online events. So Stephanie Danow and the Lifespan group, IO, they'll be doing their meeting in New York. And as you mentioned, the Longevity Escape Velocity Group, the LEV Foundation, will be having their meeting August 17th, I believe it is, in Dublin. We have those links on our site as well. So thank you to you, and thank you to Bernie, and thank you for letting Boston BioLife be part of all the wonderful things you're doing. And thank you for contributing to this program.
Thanks so much, Joe.